benefits for registration or for just implementing an EMS, the type of companies who I have seen benefit from this platform, regulatory frameworks in relationship to the 14001 standard, overview of 14001, key differences between this standard and the quality system standards, ISO 9001, AS 9100, and particularly how to leverage your ISO 9001 or AS 9100 system to implement an ISO 14001 system easily and effectively. And I will give you a step-by-step plan to do that. We'll also hit resources and timelines, how long should this take to do, and hints and pitfalls. I'm having problems with the panning. Here we go. Okay, a management system. An environmental management system is just like a quality management system in that a quality system is the business and quality processes used to ensure customer requirements are met. So it's the same thing with an EMS. It's the business and quality processes used to ensure environmental and other requirements are consistently met. So in this case, the standard doesn't care if your customer requirements are met. They care if you're meeting environmental, regulatory requirements, and in the standard it specifically calls out and other requirements to which your organization subscribes. So that means everything from OSHA to maybe some of you are getting involved with conflict minerals or REACH regulation coming out of Europe or ITAR. So it's the whole kitchen sink that way. Business case and trends. In the EU and Asia, registrations are increasing and becoming a requirement for business, and that's in part because the regulatory frameworks for environmental and chemical health and safety are really stringent in the EU. There's much more things like REACH, RoHS they're putting more pressure on businesses in the EU because they are regulatory frameworks. So in the EU and Asia, you see registrations increasing and becoming that requirement for business. Coupling health and safety requirements with ISO 14001 registrations. But in the U.S., registrations have been low, and they've been low since the inception of the standard back in the 1990s, and significantly lower than the EU. The only thing that's really driving registration in the U.S. that's significant is public perception and the perception of being green or environmentally responsible. The only exception to that is the chemical industry, which has, over the course of many years in 52 countries throughout the world, developed a more proactive response to environmental health and safety regulations and requirements through the implementation of responsible care. And it is the industry standards to improve health, safety, and environmental performance. Why don't U.S. companies do ISO 14001? This is a really good research piece I found on the internet, and I put the link so you can find it, and you can see that consistently over since the late 1990s to 2001, U.S. registrations in North America are way down there in the green area, which is that little teeny bump by the red bar. And why? When you talk to companies, they don't see the value. They cite the costs for implementing an EMS as too high given the benefit. I'm going to try to show you today and demonstrate that you can find a benefit and that you can do an ROI, and maybe the benefits of implementing an EMS are growing. But we can see over the past 10 plus years, in 1999, North America made up only 7% of the 14001 certifications compared to Europe, which was almost 52%, and Asia and the Pacific, which were 37%. And then in the years, in the interim, North America registrations were just 2.5% in 2010 and only ticked up in subsequent years to 2.9%. And with the change in the standard, which a proposed change to the standard is coming out in 2015, that will require now companies to actually comply with all their environmental laws and regulations and other requirements to which their organization subscribes. The drivers for U.S. registration may be even lower because it is very difficult to comply with all these regulations. Environmental is one thing, but if you look at REACH, conflict minerals, which some of you are facing, even RoHS, which we've had very, very many years under the belt, some of those platforms, it's difficult even to determine whether you can comply or not. So again, I don't know that there's going to be a driver for more registration, but there may be a benefit for you considering to do this. What would be that benefit? If you're in a industry where you are at high risk, you're at high risk for OSHA violations or OSHA occurrences or environmental health and safety risks and incidences or environmental spills, that would be a good reason. These are some of the companies that I've seen benefit. For example, I did an EMS implementation for the Manchester Fuel Depot up in Navy Northwest region. That is a tank farm that's sitting right on the water at Bremerton. And with my contacts at the Navy, we developed an EMS that really helped improve operations and won an award. That's a high-risk operation. Louisiana Pacific, back in the 1990s, the same time that their quality on their siding went kaput, they had a major environmental spill. They had enough risk to their operations that it behooved them to put in that would have behooved them to put in EMS. So those kind of things. Past track records and high incident costs. So if you're an organization which has had a finding or consent order or a fine from the EPA or OSHA, that would be a good reason to implement one of these EMSs and be registered to the standard. For example, I did an evaluation of a drill rig up in Alaska, and the operator had the supervisor for the drill rig had inadvertently and mistakenly put hazardous waste down a drill hole. And he went to jail, and the company was fined. But part of the consent order was to implement an EMS, a 14001 environmental management system. And so by that, they got some decrease in payment and fines that they had to do. But more than that, it improved their performance going forward so that they were at less risk for that kind of an incident happening in the future. Another situation where I think it can behoove a company, and maybe not to get ISO 14001 registered, but to look at it in terms of a way to develop an environmental health and safety system or to address OSHA regulations for the first time. Suppose you're a small company that outsources your manufacturing, but you're somewhat responsible for part of the production process, and you're new and you're a startup. This is a good way to get your arms around what's required and how to manage your risk. And again, if you want to decrease those incident costs of those type of occurrences. And then, of course, if you've got high-profile customers who are demanding you or requiring for the cost of doing business, implementation of an EMS, or if you're entering markets, particularly the EU, where these requirements are greater. So those are the cases that I've seen. So again, what are the benefits? Benefits is you can minimize your risk. You can look comprehensively at your risks and potential outcomes and do your return on your investment analysis to determine whether this is right for you, and minimize your risks going forward associated with environmental and health and safety incidences. You can improve your operational consistency and efficiency. So now, just like your quality system, your responsibilities for your environmental health and safety management are spread across your whole organization, and they're proactively managed not just by your EHS department, which by and large runs around trying to do things, but sometimes ends up spending a lot of their time correcting what other people could have done correctly in the first place. So therefore, you can actually reduce your operating costs if you account for them the right way. And then, too, as you'll see, you can, as you build the system, you can take credit and recognize some of the things that you're already doing to manage environmental health and safety as part of this system. You can improve public perception. Suppose you're Pacific Core and you're in the middle of Wyoming in a pristine area. This is another one of my past clients. And you've got a lot of environmental group scrutiny. This is a way for you to improve your public perception on performance with respect to the environment. And again, as I mentioned before, gain market recognition in some cases. You can meet stakeholder requirements and customer requirements. And you can actually reduce your regulatory burden if you do this right, and improve your compliance with regulations and all these other requirements that the standard mentions in terms of, you're encompassing all your regulations and industry standards in one management system that you proactively manage together instead of parsing out different regulations or different technical industry standards to different people in your organization, and things get kind of piecemeal managed. Now you have a comprehensive system where you bring all this under one umbrella, and now you're proactively managing these regulations and standards as a team and as one unit. And then again, as I said before, there's potential with EPA and the DEQ and ecology to reduce your legal liabilities and fines. On that note, what happened with EPA? EPA, DEQ, ecology back in the 1990s really didn't see much value in the EMS standard because the standard did not require that you actually comply with environmental health and safety regulations. It said that you were going to comply with the standard. And so EPA recognized a company could be registered but not comply to its own regulations. But then people like, for example, Service Steel Mill, who operates coke ovens, started with implementing an EMS, and they went from 350 excursions per year and dropped down to 200 and are now less than 1,000 excursions per year. And so these companies that were early adopters, Pacific Core, Service Steel, made a definite improvement in performance, and EPA started to recognize that an EMS was valuable, and then used it, as I said, with the cases that I've been involved with, as a choice in a consent order and a fine, to either have the consent order, the fine, or to do an EMS, 14001 EMS, as an alternative. And so it's working. The other thing is, as I mentioned before, kitchen sink factor is as the growing number of regulations and industry standards expands, this provides a common platform to manage all of those requirements. So again, We'll get into now how to build your EMS and what the standard requires. Key elements are just like the quality system standards. You need to understand plan your activities. In this case, we need to understand our potential environmental impacts, regulatory and other requirements, define processes and document those processes and turn them into procedures and implement the procedures, and then improve. And then as we improve, we build reliability and repeatability into the processes around environmental management, and we're on the continual improvement loop. 14001, just like all the other standards, is a series. The one we're going to talk about today is 14001, not the rest of these. And 14001 defines all the requirements for a good environmental management system. What are the elements? At a high level, they look just like Edward Deming planned them to look. We plan, we do, we check, and we act. Same elements, and you'll see a lot that are very similar to the quality system standards. Number one, in the planning stage, we have to have an environmental policy. And then the biggest thing that is different about this standard is the need to evaluate the environmental aspects and impacts of your organization. An aspect is any element of an organization's activities, products, or services that can interact with the environment. The impact is any change to the environment, whether adverse, beneficial, resulting from an organization's aspects. And there's a lot of confusion around the word aspects. People define it a variety of ways, and I've seen analysis of aspects and impacts where they're changing the definition all the time. And so the easiest thing for you to consider is to treat an aspect as part of a process. And I'll explain that in a little bit. So that an aspect is an activity within a process flow diagram. Whether it's a product or service, it's an activity. And then the analysis can become pretty simple. And we'll get into that in a minute. So again, major difference is defining what your environmental impacts are from the activities that you do. Second is defining the depth and breadth of all your legal requirements, whether they be environmental, health and safety, technical standards that you're going to bring under this program. Objectives and targets. An objective, as we know, is the overall goal consistent with the policy that we set to achieve. And those targets are detailed performance requirements. When you're going to have it done by, and what is it going to look like when you get there. And in this case, I've also seen organizations develop an overall objective and target for every single aspect and impact they have. That's not advisable. What you want to do is save your objectives and targets for your goals that are part of your environmental improvement programs. Then we do. This starts to look really familiar. We have to identify resources, roles, responsibilities, and authorities. Competence, training, and awareness. These are just like ISO 9001 and AS 9100. Communication's a little bit different. It's communication procedure for communication within the organization regarding environmental aspects and impacts and processes and procedures. It's also communication to the organization from outside parties. So a procedure so that if someone outside the organization contacts your company about your environmental management systems, they have a method to reach the right person within the organization, and that you have as an organization decided how to respond to those inquiries. It doesn't mean you have to respond, but how are you going to respond? Documentation, same as the quality standards. We need to document this environmental management system. Document control, it's the same. Operational control, It's just like your standard operating procedures, but this time now those procedures have how are we going to establish controls for the significant aspects and impacts to the environment and health and safety in our organization. And then lastly in this section is emergency preparedness and response. So there's a requirement to have emergency preparedness and response protocols and drills. And finally, checking and action. This again looks familiar. We need to monitor and measure the significant aspects and impacts of our operation, but that's similar to your quality systems monitoring and measuring. But 452 is different. It's evaluation of compliance. So there we have internal audits, as you can see below in 4.5.5 about our environmental management system, but 4.5.2 is actually a legal and other requirements compliance audit. So it's a little different. 453 is your nonconformance and corrective preventative action, and control of records follows, internal audit. These are all just like the quality system standards. And finally, management review. So what are the distinct processes that are unique to ISO 14001? Again, environmental aspects and impacts analysis, legal and other requirements analysis, objective targets and programs for improvement, communication process, emergency preparedness and response, and evaluation of compliance. That's what it boils down to. And if you take the approach that I'm going to build this EMS, leveraging the rest of my quality system and only focusing on these things, this can be a quick turnaround time for you in implementation. 14,000 requires more procedures, but again, look at how many you can leverage from your ISO or AS system. Aspects, impacts, new. Legal and other requirements, new. Training and awareness, you leverage. Communication is new. Document control, leverage. Operational controls, leverage. Emergency preparedness and response, it's new, but you probably already have a procedure, protocol, and response. Monitoring and measuring, leverage. Evaluation of compliance, new. Nonconformance, corrective preventative action, leverage. Document control, leverage. Internal audit, leverage. Management review, leverage. So that said, what I would do, we'll take you through now how to do this analysis and how to build your system. But the main thing to think about is when I'm leveraging the rest of these frameworks, what I can do now is focus on the new things. And in my EMS manual, I can point to the procedure for these standard QMS elements, and we can use them with very little change. So that's what I recommend. And I've actually helped a company in the last year or so through this process. They were implementing a QMS at the same time they did ISO 14001. And really, with me just helping them on the aspects, impacts, and legal and other requirements analysis, they were able to expedite a 14001 registration within 6 months. But that's lightning speed. They were a very small company. So how do we get started? First of all, as I said before, the most different thing is this aspects and impacts analysis. I'm going to spend the next few slides here showing you how to do one. The easiest way to do them is to think about them in terms of mapping. And I don't mean a detailed process flow diagram, but a simple process map or other technique. I have a format that I use that has a simple picture of the process and then compiles the different things on the same sheet of paper that you're going to do the aspects and impacts analysis on. And I'll explain that in a minute. So basically, if you visualize your process either as a group of people or as a group, and that's typically how people, organizations choose to do this, because they know that different people in the organization understand impacts to the environment or potential impacts differently because of their role in the organization. So typically what you see is at least 3 to 6 people getting together and working through one of these analyses together. It takes a little bit of time, but by doing that you do a full analysis, and you're also able to include the other things that I'm going to recommend you include in that analysis. So what you do is you make it easy on yourself. Okay, I'm going to do my aspects and impacts analysis, but while I'm already there, I'm also going to identify all my regulatory and other requirements around the aspects and impacts. I'm also going to include any operational controls that are related to the aspects and impacts. And I'm also going to include any records that are kept. And so by doing this, you're starting to look forward at your system. We'll do more about that in a minute. So during this analysis, you identify your aspects and potential impacts and your regulatory requirements. You apply your simple scoring matrix, and this is a risk matrix, or you can just use common sense to determine significant aspects and impacts. You can establish objectives and targets, and then again for significant aspects and impacts that you want to improve on, and roll those into a program, and really all that is a project plan to work toward those objectives and targets. So this shows you in a visual sense what we mean. We've got it up in the upper left-hand corner. We've identified our activities, products, and services. We identify what I would do is sub-activities, which I'll call aspects of the operation. We determine if they have a significant impact to the environment. We determine if they're controllable. We also consider legal and other requirements with regard to the analysis. Then we establish objectives and targets, considering our policy, and develop a small environmental program for improvement. And this is really just continual improvement. It's the last element of that. So here's a different way to look at it. We have a processor activity, again, starting up in the left-hand top corner. And that activity, say it is unloading fuel from a tanker truck onto an airplane. Okay, that there's different steps of that activity. So there may be risks at different steps of that activity, and those are the aspects. And at each step, whether it be the actual hookup activity or the actual fueling activity, they have different impacts, potential impacts to the environment. There could be fugitive emissions, there could be spills to surface water, there could be spills to groundwater, there could be health and safety concerns. Each of those is an impact. Now we've compiled all those things and we score them. So now we're up over in the quadrant to the upper right. So we score them, we prioritize, we make recommendations, and we develop systems, and we'll get into that in a minute, to manage those impacts to the environment. Or let's say to prohibit those impacts to the environment, to manage those aspects so they're managed, controlled, and monitored so that we don't have any impacts to the environment or health and safety. What are potential impacts to the environment? These are the type of things we consider. Impacts on wastewater, stormwater, point source air emissions, fugitive air emissions, air, water, soil, groundwater contamination, waste generation, impacts on ecology, on natural resources, and of course on humans. And as I said, this is my biggest hint in the way other than leveraging your QMS to build one of these EMSs, is that you take one of these process flow diagrams and you summarize every other element that you're going to need to know to build your EMS at the same time. You don't go back. You don't do an aspects and impacts and rank them and then have to go back and pick up your regulatory requirements or other requirements to which your organization subscribes. You don't have to go back and do it again and pick up operational controls, records. You do it all at the same time. So you're getting your inputs and your outputs that could have impact on the environment and health and safety. You're capturing your current operation, maintenance, and monitoring requirements and procedures. You're capturing your regulatory requirements around each aspect, your compliance, your permits, all your record keeping, and any reporting. So now you can see, once you rank this, where you're going and how you're going to get there. And then it's a matter of identifying gaps, which also comes out of this process, filling them, and really for the most part, for most of you operating in the U.S. in this day and age, you're going to be documenting what you already do right. So if you blow this up, you can see this. This is an example. This is in the public domain. It's one from a long time ago, but it's this example of what, and this is, I think, Allegheny County Airport and Pittsburgh. They adopted EMSs way back in the 90s, I think even before the standard was enacted. And it shows you how they visualize their process. And so you can see the tanker truck rolls up. We know we have storage tanks. They've decided how big they are. They know what number of tank it is. They know what it's stored. With the red arrows, they've determined what potential impacts there are to the environment at different stages. So the tanker unloads into the storage tanks. So at the tanker, there's risk. At the storage tank, there's risks. At the runway, there's risks. And you can see how they've outlined this, so it's very easy to see. They've also described certain activities so that they can understand them better and understand what they have to do to fill any gaps that they had at the time for managing their environmental impact activities, related activities. So my flow charts that I use are a little bit more detailed than this, but I think this gives a good illustration of one method by which you can visualize this and start to make sense of it. Take it out of text and put it into something visual and do a good job of analyzing your aspects and impacts and how to manage them and how to take credit for what you already do. Again, you need to determine the significance of the impact. So not every impact is going to be significant. And, you know, I really work with clients, whatever they want to do to make this job of risk ranking easy. Sometimes if you're used to a risk ranking system, meaning consequence multiplied by probability, that's easiest for you. In this case, the consequence needs to include not only the impact intensity, but the geographical extent, as you can imagine. If you have a small spill in the lab, it's not going to be the same thing as if you have a large spill outdoors that the spill area is somehow connected to stormwater. It's not the same. But really, sometimes common sense is the easiest way and the most effective way to determine and not overthink your significance ranking. Okay, so what's step 2? Step 2 is simple. Now we've completed this aspects, impacts, objectives, and targets and programs analysis. We've evaluated all our regulatory requirements. We know where we're going in terms of operational controls that we need to do and what systems we need to put in place or what systems are already there. We need to document all this, okay? So there's a requirement to have an aspects and impacts, and objectives and targets procedure so that you evaluate aspects and impacts and your programs annually and when change occurs. So you document that. What's the neat thing about this is also now you have an opportunity to document all your regulatory and other requirements into one area, and then establish also there is a requirement for monitoring changes in regulations and other requirements on a continual basis. So you have a way, you have a procedure for that. But you're looking forward, and you're going to integrate now your operation, maintenance, and monitoring controls, if you're doing it right, in your other procedures that you already have. There's no reason to create separate things for environmental management, because if they're separate, we all know they won't get done. But if they're integrated with the procedures that you already have for your operators and your managers, there's a higher likelihood, if training's effective, that those activities will get done. And then again, you've decided on a communications process that needs to be turned into a procedure, so you have good communication internally and also from outside parties. And then it gets easier. You write your required procedures, you augment your 9000 or AS 9100 procedures, you expand your operational controls to include these environmental management elements. You include those activities, tasks in the operational controls, in your SOPs for the tasks, for how to monitor and measure, what records need to be kept, and training. And then you're training and you're implementing to your system. Now we're picking up speed. And finally, step 4 is conducting an emergency response drill, which you probably have done already. Step 5, just like the quality system standards, you need to do a complete round of internal audits on your system before you move forward with registration. You do your compliance audit, whether you're in compliance with your regulatory and other requirements. You correct, you prevent, and you're ready for your registrar. And then finally, continual improvement. So how long does this take? Like I said, I've had one client which I just got them started in the aspects and impacts analysis. We finished that and they were done in 6 months. That's out of the ordinary. With an ISO or AS base, you can expect, depending on the size of your organization and how well you manage the project, to be done in a year to 18 months. Like all QMS projects, you have to decide whether you can really internally commit to getting this done with only internal resources, or if you need a consultant. And again, I think for those of you who have a robust quality system, this becomes a much easier decision. Sometimes, you know, you've got the internal expertise of your quality department, and then you've got a separate expertise in environmental health and safety. But the environmental health and safety people really don't understand sometimes the quality system enough to build it, and vice versa. And that's where it does benefit you to at least bring in a consultant for the aspects and impact stage of the analysis, because that brings the two sections of the organization together to teach each other what the other one doesn't know, and really to expedite that aspects and impacts analysis as I described it, so that the rest of the project becomes easier and gets done in a more timely manner. And that's all in the complex of understanding, too, what your internal commitment needs to be to get it done in your projected time frame. So my hints, and then we're going to close a little early. Again, based on my past experience, the biggest thing you can do is leverage your quality system to make implementation of your environmental management system easy. As I said before, the aspects and impacts analysis, use a process to flow diagram, a visual representation of what you're doing, and keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate it with every step of the process. This is a tool to bring everybody to the same page to make your analysis easier. Include your regulatory and other requirements, all your operation, maintenance, and monitoring in the same analysis that you can create a good project plan for implementation going forward. As a friend of mine who's a registrar's auditor said, keep it simple for the entire system. You don't want to get overzealous here and say that you're going to achieve more than what you really can comply with to begin with. You always want to, in terms of a goal, we're going to comply with all environmental regulations. You don't want to say that. You want to make sure you can meet the requirements you set, because you can always do more, but you can't do less in this framework. Plan and manage it as a project. I can't, and this is a recommendation no matter what you do, whether it's a QMS, AS9100, whatever, 9001. The biggest pitfall I see is that people don't understand how to run a QMS or an EMS implementation as a project. That's the value in doing your aspects and impacts analysis, as the way I indicated, is now you know you can create a really good project plan to get this thing done in a reasonable time. And you can now start, meaning scope, schedule, and what resources are needed. And now you can go back to your organization and really sell it and really get the commitment that you need to achieve your goal, because people will understand the level of effort needed and the schedule and can buy in, not only from your implementation team, but any other resource or stakeholder you need for implementation. And as I said before, understand the Environmental Health and Safety Department's limitations and experience. And bring that together with the Quality System Department, and then you're on your way to a more rapid implementation. So anyway, that's all I had for today. Be glad to address any questions you have. You can feel free to email me at Deborah@mervingroup.com. Contact information up there. You can find my website and my LinkedIn contact there. So feel free to contact me with any questions. Again, I wanted to thank PNDC, Marcia Buser, who's a friend of mine who introduced me to PNDC, and Jay Slaughter, one of my first EMS clients. He's an ABS lead auditor and chemical engineer, and a quality systems guy, but a great help to me. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Deborah. I know that was a lot to pack in an hour and less. So if you have any questions, here's the contact information for Deborah, Deborah@mervingroup.com. We will also be sending this presentation to all the attendees. If you have any questions, you can visit our website at www.pndc.us, or you can give us an email at info@pndc.us. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you guys at the next webinar.